Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at access levels on the UI side, so on our Nuxtjs side. If you're a visitor, if you are an authenticated user or a moderator, what buttons can you click, what pages can you visit, how do we handle this stuff, how do we reuse logic, etc. Right? So we already have something in places, but just as a general thing, how are we going to handle this? So without rambling on too much, let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to bring up our default layout page. So currently what will happen is if I'm a visitor, this gray button right here, we can actually see it and click on it and see the options there. And I don't want to display this create button unless you are signed in, right? So if you're a visitor, you should not be able to see it. Maybe there should be some kind of indication that you can create, upload stuff, but not on. But that should be displayed in a different way, I think. But other than that, for now, let's go ahead and drop some of this stuff down. I feel like there was a lot of it, so whatever. It's just so it fits on one screen. So if you're a guest, right, you're not gonna have this button, and you're only going to have the login button. Another thing are going to be some of the options that are going to be displayed in the content creation dialog. Let's go ahead first, make it self-closing, go in here, and for these menu items, let's go ahead and map some more state. And the actual state that we're going to be actually, and not even state, we're going to be mapping getters. So I think, as I mentioned more towards the start or throughout the series, is that difficulties and categories should primarily be created only by moderators. So I want to check if the user that is about to be doing any creation is a moderator. And here we just want to say display true for trick. We're going to do the same for submission, for difficulty, and for category. But now for difficulty and category, just replace it with moderator, right? So far, so good. Nothing too hard. So if I then, in the menu items, when I have this array, if I go ahead and filter based on display, so basically bring out the stuff only that should be displayed, right? If I then log in, test password, coming back here, when I press on the create, you can see as a test user, I can only upload tricks and submissions. Okay, so that's the way to handle that. As a user, if we go on the backflip, we should be able to edit the trick or upload a submission, and perhaps look at different versions. I think looking at different versions should be more of a universal thing. Even if you're a visitor, you should be able to do it. But if you're a user, you should be able to submit edits and you should be able to upload. So let's go ahead and first implement the uploading bit. So let's see how we can initiate an upload. So essentially, when we do the submission, instead of selecting the trick here, we want to be able to just kind of seed that value. Okay, so when I was playing around with it, let's go ahead and come back here. We're gonna go on the trick, and it was actually trick info card. So let's go in here. So kind of like how we have this active bit here, all we do is we just kind of copy it and we say update, right? So we want to initiate an update, or it's an upload, sorry. It's not an update. We're not updating anything. We're uploading, right? So we want to upload a submission. The tricky part is if we go into the submission steps, the form exists right here, right? So what we need to do is we need to somehow, from our trick info card, put the ID in more or less of a generic way, because remember that submission steps, trick steps, and the two other forms all target the video upload, which we should, I will make it as part of a bigger refactoring session, but for now it stays. It should be a generic way. So there should be some kind of a setup function that any of those can run, and the setup should be provided for the thing that is kind of setting up that form. So that's what we're going to do. From here, we're gonna set up whichever form this is going to trigger, because we really don't need that specific submission steps. We're basically going to say from wherever we activate this, provide a setup. So on the upload, on the activate, first things first is let's go ahead into the imports, copy the trick steps, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my submission steps here, and I'm going to just copy this name to put it here and just capitalize it so, you know, it looks like a real thing. So this is the component that we're now activating. There is going to be no edit and no edit payload. This is going to be just an upload, but with a setup of the ID. The thing that we want to set up is this trick ID here. So let's go ahead and see how we can do this. We can say that we want to provide something like a setup. We will pass a form into here, and in this form, we will say, let's take this trick ID and trick, I think it's slugged. So if I go into the submissions controller, on the create function right here, let's see the trick ID on the submission form. We do have a string, so I do think I believe it's a slug. Let's just double check on the trick controller when we get all the submissions. Yeah, so we pass a string here, we do it off a slug, etc. Right? It's a slug. We're using a slug. Let's keep using a slug. So again, on the trick info card, when I initiate an upload, I will be bringing up that submission steps, what's it called, submission steps form. And this is basically, we will need to fix this one up in just a second. But let's go ahead and handle this activate. So what's going to happen here? Now that we're passing a setup, by default, let's go ahead and say that it's null. And here we'll say setup and state setup equals setup. So if we're passing a setup, let's just set the setup here, right? So usually it's function, but like if it's null, then you know, just don't do anything with it. Now for this specific thing, for the setup, what we can do is in the created, so whenever this setup steps gets created, what we can do is let's first of all get rid of this map getters here, and for wherever we were using trick items, it was probably right here, right? So wherever we were setting up tricks, so we'll have a list, and we will be reusing a one from trick steps wherever we set up that thing to be already, like the mapping, but without the filter, right? So it could be reused in some way, but I haven't thought of a good place to put it yet. Yeah, grab about yay much, put this here. So map x is each individual trick, value is ID here. So we actually can't reuse it 100% because remember that the actual value, the actual trick ID that we are supplying here that is going to go off this value is a slug. So we actually want to change this to a slug, okay? And that's the thing that's going to get passed in the controller. And remember, the whole reason why we actually have a slug is we don't want the submissions to be tied to a specific version of a trick. As the trick sort of evolves and information changes about the trick, the real foundation of how people do the trick doesn't. So all the submissions there are valid, and maybe if it ever does, maybe then manual intervention is more feasible than having the platform be that level of dynamic to handle that specific situation. But nevertheless, we fixed that error of invalid import. So all we want to do now is, I think, yeah, this is going to be coming from state and list. This is going to be lists. Let me just see that I didn't misspell here. Right, so another thing that we want, let's just put this on a destructuring, right? Get another thing in here, video upload. What do we want? We want the setup. I think I'm gonna stop here just so you kind of get an idea of where I'm going. in order to not repeat this, because I said from the beginning that I want this to be generic enough to work for all forms, because the video upload is that centralized content creation store. I want this to be generic enough to work for each individual form and potentially maybe future forms, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a mixin, okay? So in the close, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this and, what we're going to do here is generate a form. And this form is going to be different, right? Because we need to grab the form that we have in our component. We need to put it through the setup. But for the form to exist here, in order to be, we need to pass the form into here in order to, put it through the setup. So what we will have is a form factory, right? So like an initialization function sort of thing. I think that is already apparent what that is. And then just put brackets around this so we know that this is going to be returning a new object, okay? Computed data. Data is for actually not this, so it will be a new object like this. And I just, because there's going to be other state that we want to sort of compose with, the form factory is just going to be here. Okay, so we execute the form factory and we assign it to this form here, and data is as it were. And the created function, I think for this we will need it like this. For the mixin, I can't remember exactly. If we get any errors, we'll solve them. But this stuff, I mean, I don't think we need it, so let's remove it here. So for the submission steps, again, the created part, I'm gonna remove it because, as I said, I want to reuse this logic. I then want to go into grab this map state that I just did here. I'm gonna go back into shared, and I will put it just here, right? So that has imported map state from Vuex. If you have it underlined or whatever, just make sure that you import it. And all that we're going to do is we're going to call this setup with this form, okay? And that's about it. All we have to do now is make sure that we have this mixin here. So let me just go ahead and pop this back here. For the mixin, all right, again, if we go into imports, and I think if I pop form into here, you can see, I guess that's a bit of a better way to import it, to be fair, I think as well. Let's put it here like that. Good. I have been made happy with that. But yeah, form, remember it's a function, and the thing that we actually want to pass in there is a factory. So this is the thing that we are going to create. So just, sure it's a lambda, and in brackets make sure that we are returning some kind of object, and then that's about it. It may look a little bit wonky. Maybe if I put it a little bit like this, I think, yeah, that's a little bit better. But that's basically the mixin and the form and the thing that we're going to be appending, right? So this is the form that's going to go through the setup. Okay, let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Coming back here, opening up the console. Let's just go ahead and refresh this, make sure there are no errors. Upload and cannot read property setup of undefined. So let's quickly go here, and I really think this has done something like this. So like I have to write it as a function or something like that. Again, let's just give this a quick refresh, go on the backflip and press upload. Okay, cool. So now if we pick a video, there we go. You can see the backflip is automatically selected. Now, anywhere where we need to reuse this logic of setting up a form on one of these creation windows, we can essentially do it from anywhere within the app, as long as we provide a factory or kind of like a action in the dependency injection. How we basically, let me show you in the startup file here, right? So essentially what we're doing is we reused the same pattern of how we provide an action for the configuration. This setup is essentially that same thing that we're doing here, okay? So just a second, let me just close all of that. Let me just actually make sure that everything works in terms of like actual uploading logic. So give it a refresh, and okay, so there it is, and video plays. Okay, so now as a user, I should be able to upload this. And one thing actually I want to, before we go anywhere, right, is you can see how it says edited by. That is wrong. That it has been created by, because this is version 1. So let's actually go ahead and amend this a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to grab the trick again. We're going to the trick info card because this is where this logic is. But for the append here, let's go ahead and make this a thing that we resolve. So for trick version, if we are on 1, let's go ahead and say created by rather than edited by, right? So this should say created by. Come on, I can't believe it. I had to refresh this, but yeah, anyway, created by, right? So anytime anything's created, we can I think we can even separate, but never mind. The whole thing is like version 1 created, versions after it's been edited or last edited by, whatever. Moving on, if I'm a visitor and I'm visiting this trick, right, I should not be able to see this edit or upload stuff nonsense, period. I want to see a login logout button, right? So how are we going to handle this? And thinking about it, coming back to the default layout, however we have these things with the skeleton loader, I kind of want to do it the same way, okay? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to first move this out into its own component, which is going to do this specific thing, because we do need to add stuff from the store in order to handle this. So we will just move it out into its own component so we can reuse the logic of it displaying something if we're not authenticated, right? So let's just go into the web client, into the components, and let's get a directory in here, and let's call it auth. In this auth directory, let's create a if auth component. So if authenticated, kind of like what do we do if we're authenticated and whatnot, right? So I want it to be more or less simple. So let's go ahead and see how we can do this. So let me close everything except the default one. And primary thing, I think I will consolidate these two. So if you don't know what consolidate is, it's a word that programmers like to use. Consolidate means like narrow it down, combine it together, like put it under one roof sort of thing, right? So for now, we are just going to take this skeleton loader here, and we are just going to put it here. The content creation thing is going to become a slot. All right, so the reason it becomes a slot is this is what's going to be displayed if we are allowed, because if we are loading or when we have finished authentication, if we are authenticated, that's what's going to be displayed. If we're not authenticated, we're going to be displaying a different thing, right? So on the div here, v-else, or even I think this could be a slot in it of itself. So let's make this a slot and name forbidden. And yeah, just put a v-else here and we'll see what happens now, right? So on the default layout page here, let's messed up the windows here. So first of all, let's get these under one roof more or less, or let's first get those map state and getters in there. So all this computed stuff, let's put it in here. Got the imports, sweet. The profile, don't need it. Moderator, don't need it for now. I think this is more than enough. Or yeah, more than enough, right? So if auth, if we are authenticated, the first template v slot, and if we're allowed, right? So what should be displayed if we are allowed? Where if we're authenticated, display this content creation dialog and the whole profile thing. So you see this whole menu thing here where we have the profile and the logout. Yeah, that's just another thing that we want to display. And because this is a template, we will need to put it under one roof of a div. So let's just do that. And this is what's going to be displayed if we're allowed. Otherwise, with the template for the slot forbidden, so if we're forbidden, let's provide a V button. And I don't think we need a depress on here. The login action, that's actually something that we could feed from the button itself. So let's remove the action from there, and we will put this here, right? So the method lives now on the if auth component, and same as before, we are just going to bind login to the forbidden one. So however that component chooses to bind the login functionality, it can use this function in whatever way it sees fit. Right here, all we'll have to do is deconstruct the login, destructure the login, I mean, and it all should look the same. This vskeletal loader doesn't need to be here. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. VElse, yeah, so the VElse, this no longer handles any logic around being authenticated or loading or anything like that, because the actual component handles all of that logic. So just gonna double check that none of that is anywhere here, right? I mean, looks sound to me. Loading, let me just double check that we're not using loading anywhere. So Control F, no occurrences, can be deleted. Authenticated, Control F, one occurrence, can be deleted. So yeah, the only thing that we're using is moderator and profile. And I think that's all right because we're displaying the profile page and, sorry, the profile image and stuff like that. So we got this component, should be working as it did before. So one thing I'd say, maybe skeletal loader isn't, oh, we're not displaying. Okay, so because while we're loading, we're not authenticated. So we want to say if we are, we want to display this while we're loading or when we're authenticated. So when we're authenticated, this one, what's it called? This one should be displaying. Okay, let's give this a refresh. So yeah, so now we see a little loader and then we finish loading. Cool. So that's that. If I will be logging out, that shouldn't appear there, but the primary thing we were doing the setup is for this part here. So let's go ahead and follow the same example. So where we have this if auth template, let's go ahead into our trick. And again, this is going to be in the trick info card, and it's just going to make everything so much simpler. If we say if auth, bring this in here, and let me just grab the templates from here. Really can't be bothered too much typing them all out again. Yeah, let me close this one, trick info card. In here, let's put these in. The template, the div, let me just get rid of the div real quick. And let me grab the two buttons that I have here. I'm gonna put them here, okay? Just like that. And for the login, and I will say login to update or edit / update. Icon doesn't need to be there. A login, we can still log in through this button here. Upload still works as it did before. I don't think anything else needs to change here. So yeah, let's give this a refresh so you can see the kind of the little loading thing. I think we should be able to say if it's small or not, and maybe just as a consistency that should be small. Right, let's see what this looks like if we log out. So if we log out, we go to the next page. So log into editor update, right? So then we press it, we log in, test password, we're here, right? Everything loads in and voila, we're a user. Okay, so the next thing is, let's just make this a little bit easier. I'm gonna take a look. I will just enable this moderation button here. So what I want to happen is if I am not signed in, if I go to the moderation, I don't want to be able to reach it. Neither do I want to have that happen with this and the profile, right? So we have a little thing that I think we do profile. Oh, it's an index. Okay, no. All right. A little thing in the mounted here that we're doing with the profile, right? It's cute. It looks nice. It looks like it's working. But what it's doing is it was waiting for the user to load, and once we got the user, we then get the submissions. We're not forbidding anyone from entering the page per se, right? So the buttons to enter that page shouldn't display at all. So if somebody's trying to navigate it, I'm happy to just, the function that it's using here to redirect to login, to just do that. I'm completely fine with that. So what again, if you don't remember what the challenge was, the challenge is that the authentication session is in the browser here. Because we get server-side rendering, we cannot lean on Nuxtjs' middleware or fetch functions, and this is why we need to use this function to basically watch the state first and then do whatever initialization or trigger whatever logic. So again, same as how we're reusing mixins, I'm again going to make a mixin for this, and we're just going to sprinkle this wherever we want to basically guard our application, right? So in the auth, what we're going to do is, yeah, that will be all right, yeah. Let's create a JavaScript file, and we'll say auth mixins. And here we will export const guard, and because we want to be able to guard by different access levels, so level, and this is a function, or I think this can be like a whole thing on its own, right? So as again, this is just like a Vue.js component. So I think if we go on here and let's say something like before route enter, this is the thing that I'm planning on using. And yeah, so if this function is available here, it's going to be available in the mixin. That's all I'm trying to say here. So let's go ahead, type it out, cut it, go into here, and let's put it here. So the 3 parameters, again, I will leave a link in the description for the Vue router documentation around this part. So this is a Vue router functionality. This is something that Nuxtjs uses, but it's not Nuxtjs specifically, it's Vue router, right? So we are making a mixin, and let's just make sure that it's a property, right? What are we doing? The first 3 parameters, 2. The first 3, the only 3 parameters. 2 from next, right? So where are we going? Where are we coming from? And the next is a delegate, so it's a function. We need to run it in order to even reach a page. So let's just go ahead and get something straight first. Right? Okay. And let's just use this mixin somewhere. So again, just because we haven't done it yet, we haven't done anything like this yet, or more or less, basically taking slow steps so we don't get confused with what the hell is going on, right? So mixins, get the guard in here. Make sure we import it, and for now we can just pass anything into there. It's not that important. So I've put it on the index page. So just kind of so you observe what happens. If we go to the moderation, you can see we have browser, but we haven't actually went anywhere, right? If I say something like moderation, the page never finishes loading because the server can't respond because it's trying to render the page, because it's trying to server-side render the thing. You need to call next, right? If you don't call next, your application is gonna hang. So just make sure that you do this, please. Okay. If you write to me about this in the comments, you're out. You're out. This is where you stop the tutorial and you go read the documentation, right? Anyway, on here now we try to go to the moderation. You can see. Yeah, okay, all right. Had to refresh the thing, but here we can see we're on the browser, and if I refresh this, you should see the server and the browser, right? So this function executes on both places. So it's kind of what we want, because what would happen if this was middleware or the fetch function? It would only execute once, either on the server side or on client side if we're actually going to that page, if we're re-navigating to that page when we're pressing a button like moderation, right? server side, we do not have access to our authentication session, okay? So if we are going to the server, if we are triggering this on the server side, just go next, all right? And then don't do anything. Well, the rest of the logic is going to happen here. So what do? The first thing to understand is that right here, in this function, and again, you can read this in the documentation, but when we actually navigate to this function, you can see this is undefined. So the usual place of how we access our, what's it called, view component stuff and stores and everything, and the plugins, we won't be able to do that here. So this is how you do it. So on the next has a delegate, right? And this delegate is how we are going to do the setup. Okay, so now if we come back here and I navigate to the moderation part, this is where we get the view component. How does exactly this thing gets loaded? Well, interesting. What happens is on the index view page, we have a fetch function which fetches the moderation items. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and say process server return. Okay, so this is a thing that we're trying to force to only run on the client. Do not run this on the server side. We don't want to pre-render this. Moderation is something that works with the authentication state, right? All the visitor stuff is the only thing that we want to pre-render, and we pre-render it so we can get crawled in the search engine optimization, right? For this sort of stuff, we are sort of trying to switch from server-side render to a SPA application, okay? So just stop this, and in the auth mixin, what's going to happen is we are going to use the function from watch user loaded. So let's go ahead and say, or not Nuxt, but rather here. So store dispatch, and in the dispatch we want auth and the action, right? So the actual place where everything is going to be happening is here, because this is where our authentication state has finished initializing. What do we want to do, right? If we are trying to reach a page that is guarded by whatever level, if we're not authenticated, we're just going to get redirected to login. If you remember here, if you don't want to do that, you provide another function in here, right? So you will need to put this into an object, and you provide another function, and then you can dynamically control this function from wherever you're calling this mixin or whatever, and you can control it by the parameter. So you can control it from the component on basically what conditions in this function do you want to take you to, okay? All right, coming back. We are going to check our authentication state. If we are not logged in, we go to the login page. Now, we are logged in. What could happen? We could be a user, or we could be a moderator, right? Another thing could happen is if we are already authenticated in the auth store, or rather the setup has already been ran, we just want to resolve it, right? So we just want to recheck the whole thing again. But anyway, all I'm gonna say is let's go ahead and get our guard levels here. So export const guard level. This is going to be just authenticated. So 1 mod 2, right? And what we want to do is we want to say something like allowed, right? Are you allowed? From the beginning we just say no, you're not allowed. And then on the Nuxt store we can go into getters, and in the getters, the other, I think there it was, right? If we are actually, no, never mind. If the guard level, so if the level guard level auth, this is where the condition for allowed is authenticated, right? If you're authenticated, you're allowed. If level guard level mod, then the real condition is whatever it was, moderator, right? Now, what do we do when we're allowed? We do the actual initialization of the page because, well, basically, do I have it still in the browser? Yeah, so here's the component, right? So on the component, if you look at this, you will still be able to see the fetch function, right? So we do not execute it on the server side. So if we are planning on going into this page, let's go ahead and call the fetch function, right? So fetch function, how do we call it? One situation that could occur is we could be not using a fetch function. So just make sure that you check. If you're allowed and you have the fetch function, do the fetch function. The reason I'm doing two separate statements is maybe you want to do something here. So, and then you do that. If you're not allowed, let's just replay the action that we should have had done in the, what's it called, in the watch user list. So usually we would log in. This is, I mean, I'm just gonna do the same thing. So just copy this, Nuxt, store, dispatch, auth, login, and that's all that's gonna happen. Okay. So now on this mixin, let's go ahead. So I'm not signed in. Let's see what happens if I just refresh the page. You can see as soon as it loads, it redirects me. So let me just, yeah, so on trig backflip, actually trig backflip, there I am. Actually, let me refresh this. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay. So on the backflip, I'm going to go into the moderation page and there we go, right? So it redirects me here to log in. And we can reuse this mixin. And one thing I actually saw there briefly, a whole microsecond, is the actual data still loaded. So we might need to handle that a little bit, but maybe it's not so important. So let me go back here. It's like that. Okay. So what other places do we want to use this mixin, and in what places is it like relevant sort of thing? Well, let's see. Where did I have this? So index page or the mod page, and the index page for moderation. So this is where we had the guard level. So the actual thing that we want to be passing here is one of these guard levels. So for this one, it's going to be auth for the mod ID or for the moderation item itself. Again, I'm not that fussy here. I think people who are authenticated should see their moderation items being moderated. I think it's more about should he be able to approve and stuff like that if you're not a moderator. So that's something that we should be looking at. On the profile, I think you should be an authenticated user to see your profile. This thing right here, I think we will take a look at it later as part of the refactoring session. See if we can stick it into the fetch or something like that. Basically have something like this, or because I did say that when we navigate to the moderation item right here, it still very briefly displays what's it called, the moderation items that it brings back. So we might want to be using, instead of mounted, some kind of custom what's it called, function that we can actually call during the guard. Okay, so that's a possibility. So basically, instead of the fetch, we will be calling a it's like says guard setup. I don't know, or a setup function or whatever. You know, we'll see where it takes us. But nevertheless, this will be it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe. Any questions, as always, leave them in the comments or come to my Discord channel, ask them there. I stream on Wednesdays and Sundays. Come to my Discord channel, ask for the stream squad role, the best role on the Discord server, and get notified when I stream, right? Other than that, I'll see you in my other episodes.